Good morning. Thank you for attending today's webinar on professional geologist license requirements in California. For the purposes of this webinar, I have assumed that you have a basic understanding of professional license concepts. If you do not, I encourage you to visit the AGI GOLI Workforce website and view the recording of the Geology Licensing Overview webinar titled Professional Geologist Licensure Requirements and the ASBO National Geology License Examinations. Today's webinar is divided into two parts. Part 1 is an overview of the process of applying for a professional license in California, and Part 2 provides a brief history of geology licensing in California and goes over some key concepts for licensees. Through the information provided in both presentations, I hope to dispel some common myths and misconceptions regarding geology licensing in California. This first presentation includes a basic description of the qualification requirements to obtain a professional license in California, a discussion about the differences between the various license types, and a description of some important regulatory updates that the board anticipates will go into effect later this year. The two presentations making up today's webinar have been prepared to address common questions asked by applicants and licensees, but it is not intended to be an all-inclusive summary of the law and regulations. Please note that laws and regulations change through time, and therefore the information in this presentation will at some point become outdated. You should always check the board's website for the most accurate and up-to-date information or contact board staff. It is your responsibility to stay up to date. Do not rely on information from friends or colleagues that may or may not be correct. There are two broad categories of documentation that you are required to provide as part of your license application: administrative and technical. A complete license application must include both. Most applicants tend to focus exclusively on the technical side of the application. However, applications can be delayed or deemed incomplete for either administrative reasons or technical reasons. Many of the administrative issues I touch on today will seem like common sense, but very often the common sense items are what delay applications. On the technical side, like most states, California requires that geologists satisfy requirements for education and experience, as well as pass the required exams. Remember, you are not applying to take an exam. You are applying to become licensed. All three criteria for geology licensure, education, experience, and exams, are equally important. Before we go into more detail about the technical qualification requirements, I think it is helpful for applicants to understand the administrative requirements and business processes used for every application submitted to the board. The board receives thousands, and I repeat that, thousands of applications each year for the three professions we regulate: engineering, land surveying, and geology. In order to handle that workload, all applications are assigned to a member of our licensing staff called an evaluator using the first letter of your last name. For example, last names beginning with the letters A through G are assigned to evaluator number 1. This person is your project manager. This person shepherds your application through the bureaucracy. This project manager is responsible for verifying that your application was sent before the appropriate deadline, making sure you've paid the appropriate fees, verifying that your application is complete, working with our enforcement staff to make sure that the background check and fingerprint requirements are satisfied. And after all that, the technical staff, called registrars, get the file for technical review, and we approve or deny the application. Please note, board members do not review individual applications. Once an application is approved, your evaluator schedules you for your exams. As you can see from the previous slide, the licensing staff juggle a great many things to get your application through the process in order to issue your license. This is an actual photo of the mail received on one day by one evaluator in the time period leading up to one of the application deadlines. The best way to help ensure that your application gets through the process quickly is to think about this volume of paper that your evaluator deals with and do what you can to make your application easy to process. Get your application in early. This gives us more time to sort out any issues so we can get your application processed in time to schedule you for your preferred exam date. Keep copies of everything you send to the board. If something gets lost or misdirected, you won't have to recreate your application. If you think you may apply for a second license type in the future, keeping a copy of your original application may provide helpful information for you later. Get a tracking number when you mail, FedEx, or UPS your application. This will allow you to confirm that the board received your application. Given the volume of applications we receive, the board staff will not provide verification that we received your application. Board staff will communicate with you regarding your application using the email address you provide. You should periodically check your email, and especially your email spam folder, for messages regarding your application. And believe it or not, these are the most common reasons applications are delayed or deemed incomplete. If we can't read your handwriting, your application will be delayed. This is why we ask for your application to be typewritten. The board is a fee-for-service agency, and your application will not pass go without fees. Do not use a form that your friend or your boss has had in their file cabinet for 5 to 10 years. It won't be accepted. Fill out every field on the application. If there is space for information, we need that information for a reason. This includes signing every page of the application where indicated. Submit your transcripts. As the technical reviewer, I need to see all of your coursework to determine if your education meets the requirements in the law and regulation. Additionally, there are very specific instructions on our website for submitting fingerprints for your background check. It is strongly recommended that you review the fingerprint page on our website when you are filling out your application. Keep in mind that it is in your best interest if the background information we receive from DOJ and FBI matches the answers you provide about your background on the application form. And finally, it is strongly recommended that you submit all of your application documentation as a complete package. If you send in documentation separately from your application, there is no guarantee that we will be able to match up everything with your application. And now some tips for submitting the independent evaluation form, more commonly called references. Approximately 40%, and that's a really big number, of the independent evaluations I get require me to contact the reference provider for more information. This is mostly because folks misunderstand the purpose of the reference. These are technical references, not employment references and not character references. Extraneous information about an applicant's character or whether or not the applicant is a good employee should not be included. The whole purpose of the reference is to describe and document the applicant's qualifying professional geologic or professional geophysical tasks, and this must be done in sufficient detail to encompass the time period for experience being claimed. And remember, only work meeting the definition of geology or geophysics in the law counts toward your work experience. For example, 80% to 90% of a Phase 1 environmental site assessment is not geology. However, 10 to 20% of a Phase 1 is geology. Only that 10 to 20% of a Phase 1 meeting the definition of geology in the law counts towards the work experience requirement. And finally, the work experience description should be prepared by the person providing the reference, not by the applicant. The reference provider should use the appropriate geologic terminology while avoiding colloquialisms, slang, and industry jargon. So where do applicants and references find the legal definitions of geology and geophysics? In the laws and regulations posted to the board's website. This is also where you'll find the legal requirements you must satisfy to earn a license. The Geologist and Geophysicist Act is the California law regulating the practices of geology and geophysics in California. It is a statutory law enacted by legislature. So what are regulations? Well, regulations are rules, also called administrative law, issued by government department or agencies such as the board to carry out the statutory laws passed by the legislature. Keep in mind that both laws and regulations are legally enforceable. In order to understand the different qualification requirements for the 4 available geology licenses, it is helpful if applicants understand that there are 2 broad categories of geology licenses offered in California. Practice Act licenses are the government's permission for you to practice a profession. For example, in California, you must have a license to practice geology or geophysics unless you fall under a legally authorized exemption. Both the practice of the profession, actually doing the work, and the use of the legally protected title are regulated by law. The 2 practice authority licenses available in California are the Professional Geologist and the Professional Geophysicist licenses. Title or authority licenses do not restrict the practice of the profession. They only regulate the use of a title. For example, any California licensed professional geologist can practice engineering geology or hydrogeology in this state without restriction. However, only a CEG or CHG can use the legally protected titles of certified engineering geologist or certified hydrogeologist. I call the CHG and CEG the consumer choice licenses. A licensee can apply for these voluntary title authority licenses if they want to document expertise in a particular geologic specialty. And now for the slide I'm sure you've all been waiting for. This is a summary of the license requirements for the geologist and geophysicist practice authority licenses. The purpose of the application process is to help you document to the board's satisfaction that you meet the education and experience requirements for licensure. Once you've substantiated that you meet the first 2 requirements, the board allows you to proceed to the last step of the process, which is taking the exams. Please note that unlike engineers and land surveyors in California, geologists and geophysicists do not have an experience-only pathway to get a professional license. This is because of differences in the ways the laws for each of the professions were originally written. Because of this difference in the law, it is very important that applicants understand the education requirements for the practice authority licenses. It is also very important for applicants to understand that their work experience does not count until the education requirements are satisfied. There are 2 options for meeting the education requirements specified in the law. For the PG license and the optional GIT certificate, it is an acceptable geological sciences degree or 30 semester hours of courses relevant to geology. 24 of the 30 semester hours must be upper division or graduate courses. Upper division courses are typically junior or senior level courses that require a prerequisite. For the geophysicist license, the requirements are similar. An acceptable degree or 30 hours of courses relevant to geophysics, 24 of which must be upper division or graduate courses. Qualifying work experience must meet the definition of geology or geophysics in the law and must be earned legally in the jurisdiction or situation in which the experience is earned. The most common example is a junior geologist or geophysicist working under the responsible charge of an appropriately licensed person. So what if you're doing qualifying geologic work under a legally authorized exemption? That work would qualify as well. For example, a junior geologist working under the exemption for federal employees at the United States Geological Survey. In that situation, the geologist who is their technical supervisor and in responsible charge of their work can provide the independent evaluation or reference. If that supervisor is not licensed, they have to provide a resume or CV to substantiate that they have the qualifications to oversee professional level geologic work. Additionally, both undergraduate coursework and graduate coursework can earn an applicant credit towards the experience requirement. Please note that it is the coursework that counts. For example, taking even one graduate course can earn you a few months education credit towards the experience requirement. You don't have to complete the graduate degree. Education credit for the PG is limited to a maximum of 36 months, and education credit for the PGP is limited to a maximum of 48 months. Once your application is approved, meaning you've met the education and experience requirements, Then you take the required exams. For the Geologist in Training Certificate, or GIT, which is an optional step on the pathway to a PG license, applicants must take and pass the National ASBO Fundamentals of Geology, or FG exam. For more information about the GIT, I suggest that you view the previous overview webinar on geology licensing posted to the AGI GOLI webpage. PG applicants must take and pass the ASBO FG exam, the ASBO Practice of Geology, or PG exam, and the California Specific exam, also called the CSE. If you've already passed the FG exam as a GIT applicant, you do not have to take it again. The ASBO exams are pencil and paper exams held twice per year in the spring and the fall. The California Specific exam is also held twice per year in the spring and the fall. Like all of the California Board license exams, the CSE is a computer-based test. Applicants make an appointment at a testing center and take the exam on a computer. Professional geophysicist license applicants take one exam, the California Geophysicist exam. It is a computer-based test offered only once per year in the fall. Once you have passed the required exams, your license or certificate is generated automatically by the board's computer system. You do not have to submit an additional form or fee for your license to be issued. Please note that you cannot use the title or claim to be licensed until you have been issued your license number by the board. The requirements for a specialty title authority license are summarized in this table. You can apply for a specialty license at the same time as you apply for a PG license. However, they are separate applications with separate fees and separate documentation requirements. Only a licensed PG will be granted a specialty license, so the education requirements for a licensee have already been met. You can submit any additional education earned since you obtained your PG if you think you may qualify for additional education credit towards the experience requirement. To obtain a specialty, an applicant must have 7 total years of qualifying geologic work experience. This is 2 additional years beyond the 5 years required for the PG license. As with the PG and PGP, the work experience is documented through the independent evaluation, also known as references, that you submit with your application. For the specialties, the 7 years of geologic experience must include either 3 years of experience doing qualifying work in that specialty under the responsible charge of someone with that specialty license, a CEG or CHG as appropriate. Please note that your work experience must meet the definitions of the specialty in the regulations. An alternate pathway is that you can document 5 years of work experience in the specialty under your own PG license. If you choose this pathway to get a specialty license, you must still supply references, and you may be asked to provide copies of reports for work you've done in the specialty. Please do not submit reports unless you've been asked to do so. The final step is to take and pass the California Specialty exam for the license you have applied for. The CEG and CHG exams are computer-based exams offered once per year in the fall. As with the PG and PGP Practice Authority licenses, once you have passed the exams, the board's computer system will automatically generate your license. Please note that you cannot use the title or claim to hold a specialty title authority until you have been issued your CEG or CHG license number by the board. In the previous 2 slides, I have summarized the qualification requirements that are in the law and regulations. In the next few slides, I want to let you know about some important updates that the board is making to the qualification requirements described in the regulations for the PG and the PGP. The board has been working on these updates for approximately 3.5 years. We anticipate that the final steps of the process will be completed soon, and the new regulation will go into effect later this year. So what are we updating in the regulations, and why are we doing it? As they are currently written, this section of the regulations dealing with the PG and the PGP qualification requirements lack important details and are difficult to understand. Additionally, There has been an 18% decrease in average number of geology semester hours required for a Bachelor of Science geology degree from California colleges and universities between 1998 and 2015. While the license minimum is still 15 semester hours lower than the current average, this trend is of concern when it comes to the board's mission to protect the public by ensuring minimum competency in the profession. The primary focus of the regulation update is to clarify the education requirements for the geology license. As we discussed earlier, there are two options for meeting the education requirements for the PG license and the GIT certificate. Option 1 is an acceptable degree, and Option 2 is 30 semester hours of qualifying geological sciences courses. This regulation provides specific guidance defining each of these options separately. Once the regulation goes into effect, Option 1, a qualifying geological sciences degree, will be defined as an ABET accredited geology or related geological sciences degree, baccalaureate level or higher. I'll describe what this means on the next slide. The majority, and by majority I mean 99%, of applications for a PG license will fall under Option 2. The 30 semester hours, 24 of which must be upper division or graduate level. The board is requiring a specific list of courses that must be part of the 30 semester hours. Please note that the classes required by the board in the draft regulation do not add up to the full 30 semester hours. Additional courses required to meet the 30 semester hour minimum will be selected at the discretion of the applicant. However, they must be geological science classes meeting the definition of geology in the law. Every California PG applicant applying under this option will be required to have 4 core geology classes: earth materials, things like mineralogy or petrology, structural geology, stratigraphy and sedimentation, and upper division field coursework. Under this option, an applicant will also be required to have 2 applied upper division electives from the list provided. Each of the classes, both core and elective, listed in the regulation has a specific definition that describes the knowledge, skills, and abilities expected out of each class. The board included these definitions based on feedback from stakeholders. These definitions allow an applicant to map their coursework to the requirements because many colleges and universities have different names for the same courses. For additional information and to read the text of the draft regulation, please visit the board's rulemaking page or contact me with questions. So what the heck is an ABET accredited degree under the first option in the draft regulation? I've included this screenshot of the Sacramento State University accreditation page as an example to help explain this. The majority of United States colleges and universities have what is called institutional accreditation. That is, accreditation of the whole school. In the Sac State example, I've highlighted their university-level accreditation by the regional accrediting agency known as the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. It is the highlight at the very top of the page. In addition to institutional level accreditation, individual departments and programs within a college or university may elect to voluntarily participate in program level accreditation specific to their discipline. In the Sac State example, at the bottom of the page, you can see a partial list of the many programs that have individual program level accreditation at Sac State. The Sac State Geology program does not have program level accreditation. Individual program level accreditation of geology programs in the United States is in its infancy, but it does exist. There are 2 entities that perform program level accreditation of geology programs: the Geological Society of London and ABET Inc. The Geological Society of London has not accredited any geology programs in the United States. However, ABET Inc. has accredited geology programs in the U.S. This is why the board chose an ABET accredited geoscience degree to satisfy the requirements for this option to qualify for a geology license in California. As I stated earlier, because program-level accreditation of geoscience programs in the U.S. is not widespread, the majority of California PG applicants will qualify under the 30 semester hours option. And remember, work experience does not count until the education requirements are satisfied. If the regulation specifies 5 semester hours of upper division field coursework to meet the 30 semester hours requirement, and the applicant only has 4 semester hours of upper division field coursework, they haven't satisfied the education requirement. Meaning that once this regulation goes into effect later this year, that applicant's work experience doesn't count towards their license until that applicant gets the full 5 semesters of upper division field coursework. Please note that you can still apply for a GIT or PG under the old requirements until this regulation goes into effect. The board will provide guidance on the website for the transition to the new updated regulations once we know when it will go into effect. In addition to the more detailed explanation of the PG education requirements, the draft regulation includes various updates to more clearly define other requirements that applicants must satisfy for the PG and PGP licenses. These include that an applicant's education must be obtained from an institutionally accredited school. There is also a more detailed explanation of who can be a reference for a PG or PGP application, a requirement that PG and PGP applicants must submit at least 3 references, and a more detailed explanation of what information must be in the reference. For additional information and to read the text of the draft regulation, please visit the board's rulemaking page or contact me with questions. Thank you for your attention. Before we move on to our second presentation, we will now take a short break for questions.
Great, thanks so much, Lori. That was lots of information, and we do have questions rolling in, so let's go ahead and jump right in. One question is, I'm working in the geology field and finishing my graduate degree at the same time. Generally, how would my experience be counted?
You can't double dip is basically the issue. So if you're working part-time and going to school part-time, we'll prorate both your experience and your education to add up to 100%. So if you're working full-time and going to school at night, we'll work with you to figure out which pathway gets you the most credit toward your application.
Great, thanks for that. Here's another question. Can I take the ASBO FG exam to get my GIT certificate before I graduate?
Yes, you can apply for the GIT certificate as soon as you meet that 30 semester hour threshold, and that's commonly reached in your junior or senior year.
Okay. And a follow-on to that is, do I have to get a GIT certificate before I can apply for the PG license? How does that work?
No, the GIT is a totally optional step. The only exam that you can take prior to getting your work experience is the Fundamentals of Geology exam, and you can only take that once you've met that minimum education requirement. Because the FG exam is intended to test basic bachelor level knowledge, it's really an advantage for people to take it shortly after school, because in reality, you've just spent 4 years or more in the world's most expensive study class. And ASBO statistics show that the longer you've been out of school, the harder it is to pass that FG exam. So if you do take it and you pass it, you get a certificate that allows you to use the legally protected title Geologist in Training. And many recent graduates use that on their resume, and it helps them find their first job.
Great, thank you. We just had one come in here talking about references. Does a PE fill the requirements for references?
Sometimes, and we'll go into this a little bit in the next presentation, but a civil engineer licensed in California has a limited exemption to the Geologist and Geophysicist Act. So in order to use an engineer as a reference for a geology application, The engineer has to document two things. One, that the geologic work they've overseen falls within that limited exemption, and two, that they're qualified to oversee geologic work. Because all of the licensing laws have what's called a competency clause. You're only licensed to be in responsible charge of work that you are competent in by training and experience. So in general, the PE references are usually submitted by geologists who are working at an engineering firm, working with geotechnical engineers doing engineering geology. That's the most common PE that we see, because outside of that, it's, they have to prove that they're practicing civil engineering legally and that geologic work they're doing falls within that exemption.
Great. And we also have a follow-on to that is, can one person have both a PG and a PE, or must you pick only one of the two?
You can have as many references as you want. The key thing is that you have to document the required amount of work experience under the responsible charge of an appropriately licensed person. So for some people, that's one person. They work for one person for 3 years, 100% of the time, and 100% of the work that they're doing is geology. That's the most easy situation. However, a lot of early career geologists work under multiple licensees. When I got my license, I needed 4 or 5 people to document that I had the required amount of work experience, because I was a junior staff geologist and I worked for 4 or 5 different licensees. So the reference has to be provided by the licensee in responsible charge. So I can't sign off for work done on somebody else's license. So if you work 20% for one person and 50% for another person and 5% for a third person, whatever combination it is, each of those people have to document that amount of time for you.
Great, thank you. Here's another one kind of along the same line. What about petroleum engineers overseeing petroleum geologists? How does that work in terms of references and or gaining experience?
The work experience description is also, we're going to cover that again in the next slide a little bit. Petroleum engineers also have a limited exemption to the Geologist and Geophysicist Act related to their work as petroleum engineers defined in the law and regulations. This exemption only applies to licensed petroleum engineers. And a situation we had last year was that we had to turn down a couple of applicants because they were working under petroleum engineers who were not licensed. So again, same with the civil, the engineer has to document that they are overseeing geologic work directly related to their practice of petroleum engineering in accordance with the limited exemption in the law. And then they also have to document that they have the qualifications to oversee professional level geologic work.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. Kind of going back to one of our first questions where you talked about part-time versus full-time students. How many units is required to be considered a full-time student here in California?
It depends on the school. The new regulation, I believe, is going to define it as, I think, 8 or 9 semester hours, which is the most common, or whatever the university specifies, whatever is less. So right now, that information, we go to the university's website and we look up what is full-time graduate level coursework, and get that number and then use that to prorate any part-time graduate work versus work experience.
Okay, great. Is there a handout or an FAQ sheet that we can give to technical references to ensure that they complete the references accurately? Was that in perhaps one of the links that we posted earlier?
The best thing that I can tell you is to go to the draft regulation on our website, and it does have a summary of the requirements for a reference in there. Any licensed individual in California is obligated to understand the laws and regulations that comply with their license. So we expect that your references understand that there is a legal definition of geology in the law. And we expect your reference to understand that the purpose of the reference is to document your work experience that meets that definition. So they can go to the laws and regulations on the website. They can call or email me if they need some additional guidance. A lot of references, again, seem to think that this is a character reference or an employment reference. I really don't care if you're a good person. I don't care if you're good with clients. I don't care if you're good with regulators. There's nothing in the licensing law that requires you to be any of those things. The licensing law requires you to be a competent geologist. So the reference is supposed to document your work, and they have to do it in sufficient detail that we can understand what you did. Simply stating, I'm a licensed geologist and I think Lori Rocca is great and would make a great geologist isn't going to cut it, because that licensee providing the reference isn't making the decision. The board is making the decision. The board's asking that licensee for the information. So as a representative of the board, I sign and seal every application I approve and deny because I'm making a geologic decision based on the information provided. So they have to really understand what is geology and what's not, and that's what they're required to do because they are licensed.
Great, thank you for that. Here's a little bit of a different question. If I'm working in a project as a consultant that is overseen by a UC professor that specializes in groundwater hydrogeology, can that professor act as a reference?
If the professor is not licensed, no, because in the situation that's being described, that professor is not doing academic work. That professor is consulting, which would require a license. So it sounds like this might be a fairly complicated situation, and what I would advise the person asking the question is to contact me and give me a little bit more specifics. But based on that limited summary, it sounds like the professor may be doing consulting work that requires a license, and if they are licensed, yes, they could be your reference, but there are very few UC professors that I'm aware of who are licensed.
Great, thank you for that. We've got a few more questions that I'd like to take here, and then we can move into the next presentation. What are my options if my license application is denied?
If your license application is denied, you have the right to appeal the decision. The application is board staff determine whether or not the information you provided substantiates that you meet the qualifications in the law. So it's a legal process. Once you're denied, you are given information on how to submit a legal appeal, which goes before an administrative law judge. And in that court hearing, you are able to present information that shows whether or not the board staff complied with the law and regulations in denying your application. And the judge makes a decision. That decision is forwarded to the licensing board, and the actual board itself, the board members, review the judge's decision and either adopt it or overturn it. This is one reason why individual board members do not review applications, because they are the official judge and jury in an appeal. So it's a very structured legal process, and you are advised of how to start that process when you receive your denial letter.
Great. Another one about license in California and other states. So I took the pre-ASBO California Professional Geologist exam. I need to take ASBO exams to get a license in another state. What would you advise that I do?
You can do that easily. You don't have to apply for your license again. Basically, you submit the re-exam form that is on the board's website and the appropriate fees to take the ASBO exam, because ASBO charges us for the exam, and we just pass that cost directly on to the applicants without markup. So if you need additional help in getting that sorted out, just give me a call or send me an email. I do advise that when you do submit your re-exam form, that you put your PG number and a note in big letters at the top of the application saying existing PG taking ASBOG exams to get licensed in another state, and that way that gives the cashier and the evaluators who basically do the intake of your application a clue of why you're doing this, and that helps them set you up properly. But again, if you have questions, just email me or call me. It's a pretty simple process.
Okay, great. That's good to know. In line with other states and licensing in other states, are there states that offer reciprocity with California for licensure requirements, meaning that California license is either honored in the other state or used to fill prereqs for the licensing in the other state?
California does not have any reciprocity agreements with any state. There are states that have reciprocity agreements with each other, but the laws and regulations in each of those states has to be consistent enough that they are essentially the same. And California's laws and regulations, including the requirement for a California specific exam, do not allow for that. However, all of the states in the US that license geologists do use the ASBOG exams. So if you have taken the ASBOG exams, your score can be transferred to any other state. There's a simple verification form that you use. Just ask the state that you're dealing with if they want you to use their form or if they will accept our form. And we acknowledge and certify that you've passed the ASBOG exams, and then you fulfill whatever requirements that state has from there.
Okay, and one last question for this presentation. Can you talk about the types of activities that constitute qualifying experiences for a PG license, especially those that relate to internship activities? What type of internship activities could count towards the experience requirement?
There are definitions of professional geologic work in the regulations. I think it's section 3003. And an internship would count under certain circumstances. First, you'd have to have already met the education requirement, that minimum 30 semester hours. And you would actually have to be doing professional level scientific geologic work. So things like going out and collecting a soil sample, that's generally considered technician level work. Anybody can go out and shove soil in a tube or a glass jar or whatever it is. The person making the decisions on where to collect that soil sample based on the geology and the needs of the project is the one that's doing the professional level geologic work. So you would have to work with the licensee who's in responsible charge of your internship and talk to them about what types of work at that company or agency would qualify. I can tell you that a student assistant that worked for Department of Toxics when I was there was able to use some of her internship work as qualifying experience for her PG license, because the licensee in responsible charge of her work had her reviewing geologic documents and making technical judgments on that work under his oversight. So it is possible.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. Okay, that's all we have. That's all the questions we have right now.
All right.
So